Okay, good morning, Eden. So today we're going to begin, before we get to continue the Gemara, which the Gemara we're holding at the next Mishnah, which gets to the next section of the Haggadah of the Seder night, the third cup. We're first going to look at the Rebbe's commentary on what we learned till now. So just to put ourselves in context, the last Mishnah we learned covered three things, which we spoke about at great length before our summer break. The three items are, number one, we had the recap of the story of the Exodus. Rabbi Gamliel's statement, which said that at the end of retelling the story, you have to recap it with describing the reasons for Pesach, Matzah, and Marar. Right? From there, we went into, in every generation, a person is supposed to see themselves as if they left Egypt. And therefore, we have to praise and thank you. And therefore, we go into Hallel. And then we conclude with the bracha. That was the three items, right? The recap of the Haggadah, the Hallel, and then the bracha. Yes? So we commented on all of this stuff in the Gemara. We spoke about the three, and we learned the Shulchan Aruch about it, and we learned the Rebbe's Haggadah about it, and all these three items. There's one comment that we didn't get from the Rebbe because I was waiting till we finished learning about Hallel, which we just did. We just finished learning about Hallel, and we learned about the Gal Yisrael as well. So we're going to learn that comment from the Rebbe now. Although the truth is that some of the comments from the Rebbe is going to come from the Gemara we're still going to learn, because what we're going to learn now in the next Mishnah is going to be the next part of the Haggadah, which is cup number 3 and cup number 4, which includes the rest of Hallel. So there's going to be more commentary from the Gemara on Hallel there, and some of what the Rebbe is going to tell us is going to come from there. But nonetheless, just to round it up, we'll look at the Rebbe's comment on this section, on the Hallel section, which is being recited before the second cup. And then we'll get back to the Mishnah. Okay, this is the Seder for today. Clear? All right. So we learned that we divide the Hallel in half. Before we drink the second cup of wine, at the conclusion of Magid, or the conclusion of telling the story of the Exodus, we conclude by saying, as we just finished saying, therefore we are obligated to thank you, to laud you, to praise you, and so on and so forth, and so forth. And therefore we launch into the Hallel because we're obligated to thank you for what we've gone through. Yes? So the Gemara, the Mishnah asks, how much of the Hallel should you recite at this juncture? We had a dispute between Shammai and Hillel. Right? Shammai said you only say the first paragraph of the Hallel, Hallelujah Avdei Hashem, and Hillel said you say the first two paragraphs, Hallelujah and B'tzeis Yisrael, which concludes with Chalamosh L'mayim Amayim, and of course the halacha is we read the first two paragraphs. Yeah, and the rest of Hallel we leave for after benching at the fourth cup of wine. Yes? Clear? So let's see the Rebbe's comment on this little division here. And that's what we're going to look at, and then we'll get to our Mishnah. So it's in the left-hand column of the page you printed there. And the italics there, right? Remember, we'll just refresh our memory. The Rebbe's Haggadah means the Rebbe's commentary on the Haggadah. Specifically, his commentary on the Alter Rebbe's Haggadah. Alter Rebbe's Haggadah means he compiled the Siddur, he compiled the proper liturgy with the instructions of how to recite the liturgy properly, and that includes the night of the Seder, right? We spoke about this, and this is the Rebbe's commentary on that. So, and as I also mentioned, that the Rebbe's commentary to the Haggadah can kind of be seen like a Rashi, in which the Rebbe focuses on, in the same way Rashi focuses on the most plain meaning of the text, but at the same time, there are deeper and deeper layers if you unpack what Rashi is actually saying, right? So very similarly, the Rebbe's Haggadah is, on the surface level at least, addressing the simple, plain meaning of the text, giving the sources and giving the basic explanation, right? But nonetheless, obviously, there are layers to unpack within the Rebbe's Haggadah as well, and we've done some of that in the past in our pre-Pesach series, and sometimes around this table as well. We've done some unpacking of the Rebbe's commentary and showing how the Rebbe's simple commentary isn't so simple after all. But nonetheless, on the basic reading, it's very simple, it's very straightforward, and oftentimes, as we'll see today, the Rebbe comments on the flow of the Haggadah. I think last year or 2 years ago, we did a series called The Seder of the Seder. Remember that? And if you remember, anyway, it's recorded online, in which we took from the Rebbe's commentary every time he explains the order of the Seder, why the Seder structures it as it is, and why each thing flows from the next. And what we're going to read now is one such commentary. Yeah, we clear on what we're doing here? Stop me if something's unclear, yeah?
Rabbi model in a sense, the style of Rashi.
It's my projection. My projection of the Rebbe's. Yes. No. No. Good point. It's only in this Haggadah, actually, because the Rebbe has many more commentaries on the Haggadah. But those come in his Farbrengen when he would speak elaborately and sometimes expound for an hour on one passage of the Haggadah. And that would look more like a classic commentary in which they would compare an analysis like a pilpul. You know, he would quote the Haggadah and ask a bunch of questions and answer them and quote from other sources and so on and so forth. But his running commentary on the Haggadah is not like that, which was written before he became Rebbe, by the way.
He wrote it?
He wrote it himself, not orally by Farbrengen and then transcribed later as most of the Rebbe's commentary is. This is written as a freestanding work at the behest of his father-in-law to write a running commentary to the Haggadah, and is written, my projection, written in a Rashi type style, in which it runs like a flowing commentary and gives, basic interpretation of what's going on, including the flow of why one thing leads to the next. But if you look into it and you dig deeper and you take apart the Rebbe's words, you'll see there's much deeper layers to what the Rebbe is doing. Just like Rashi. Rashi compiles from a bunch of places, but then he phrases it in such a way that it gives you a unique perspective. So same thing with the Rebbe. It's a compilation. He calls it Likutei Tamim. He calls it a collection. He calls his Haggadah a collection, Likutei Tamim and Hagim. But the way in which the Rebbe collects it and phrases it and puts it together, if you unpack it, you see that there's great and deep depth and wisdom to it. But we're not going to do that now. We're just going to read the surface reading of it, just to get an idea of what the Rebbe is saying. Yeah, a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's refresh our memory on this idea. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Left-hand column. Oh, why did I get here? Because just like Rashi, when Rashi comments, or well, any commentary actually, but Rashi certainly has what's a dibur hamaskel, right? You quote the relevant section. Rashi will quote the relevant section of the verse and then comment, right? And the same thing. Tosfos will do the same. Quote the relevant section of the Gemara and then comment. Well, Tosfos, yeah, they're the school of Rashi, but most commentaries will do this also. They'll select this the passage upon which they're commenting and then comment. Yeah. So the italics in the top left is the Rebbe citing to his Dibur HaMaskal, the relevant section of the Haggadah that he's going to be commenting on. What's he commenting on here? Halaluka halalu dash l'mayne moyim. Meaning he's going to comment on the entirety of the Haggadah as it's quoted at this juncture in the Haggadah. At this juncture in the Haggadah quotes two passages from the Hallel. The first one, Halaluka, and the second one, B'tzeis Yisrael. B'tzeis Yisrael concludes with the words, l'mayne moyim. So that was commenting on the fact that these two paragraphs are present here at this point. Yeah, these two paragraphs from Hallel, which Hallel itself is lifted from Tehillim, as there are puts in the parentheses there. Tehillim, Kufay Gimel, Kufay Daled, that's chapters Tehillim of 113 and 114. Yeah? Okay. Continues the Rebbe. Yomer Hallel, Keshem She'omer Yisrael, Kesheyotzim Mitzrayim. We are to recite the Hallel in the same way the Jewish people recited the Hallel when they exited Egypt. As our sages tell us in Psachim Kufid Zayin Aleph, in Psachim 117a, which is our Gemara. You'll remember we had a whole discussion. Who wrote the Hallel? Was it written by King David? Was it written by Moshe and the Jewish people? Moshe alone, the Jewish people, the prophets amongst us who recited it that we should say it when we have distress or when we have thanks. Remember this whole discussion in the Gemara, right? The Hallel was authored so that whenever Jews are facing a distress, they can say it before they're distressed as a request from Hashem, and then they can say it after they are saved as a thanks, right? And the Gemara there said that this idea originated when the Jews left Egypt. So we too are saying the Hallel just as they did when they left Egypt. Yes? And then it continues. That's right. Which is why the Hallel is not authored by King David. It's compiled by King David into his Tehillim. But it's authored originally that's the point of our discussion from the Gemara then, right? That Moshe and the Jewish people wrote it when they first left Egypt. The Haggadah actually, the Hallel says, B'tzeis Yisrael Mitzrayim, as the Jews left Egypt, right? And then the Hallel goes on to describe that. Yes? Okay.
That clears a lot up. I always thought King David used that song, but it's
we spoke about this. We spoke about this already before when we learned the Gemara. Yeah. Guys, if you're not with me, stop me. Don't let me keep on talking if you're not with me. Yes, are we with me? Yes? Okay. So the Hallel, we spoke about this in the Gemara then. We had at great length. So we say the Hallel now just as the Jews said the Hallel when they left Egypt. Yes? Okay. Continues the Rebbe. Quoting now from our Mishnah, which is in Psachim 116b. Ad heichanu omer, until which point in the Hallel should be recited at this juncture? Yes? Until which point in the Hallel? We're reading the Gemara, we're reading here. Until which point in the Haggadah, until which point in the Hallel should you read at this juncture? Says the Rebbe, quoting from our Mishnah. I had mentioned before, there's a dispute. Shammai or Hillel? Shammai says, say the first paragraph. Hallel says, say the first two paragraphs. And therefore, the Rebbe quotes here Hillel, because that's what we do. The house of Hillel, the school of Hillel said, you read at this juncture, At Chalomish L'mayim Mayim. You read the first few paragraphs of the Hallel, which concludes with the words At Chalomish L'mayim Mayim. Clear? That was giving us a source and the background for saying the Hallel at this juncture, which comes from our Gemara. Yes? Okay, now continue.
This has nothing to do with when we were discussing where you put the Hallelujah.
That was connected to this discussion, but it's not coming up here because it's, I don't know why it's not coming up here, but anyway, it's not in the Rebbe's Haggadah. But yes, in the same Gemara we discussed, where the word Hallel goes, that's the same place we had this discussion about who authored the Hallel. Yes, that was the same discussion in the Gemara, yes. Okay, continues the Rebbe, second paragraph on the left. Ein mevorchin al Hallel zeh. We don't make a bracha on this Hallel. Why not? Every time we say Hallel. Certainly when we say the complete Hallel, we make a bracha, right? We say Hallel in davening, Chanukah, not Purim, but Yom Tif, right? We begin with Baruch Hashem Lakim Alachalam, Asher Kishem Tetzavili, V'etzivonu L'kroyas HaHallel. Right? That's a bracha, just because it's a mitzvah like any other. It's a rabbinic mitzvah, but nonetheless a mitzvah. And like we say a bracha when we light the menorah, which is a rabbinic mitzvah, and we say a bracha before we read the Megillah, which is a rabbinic mitzvah, and we say a bracha before we wash our hands for Negavaser, which is a rabbinic mitzvah, and we say a bracha when we light Shabbos candles, which is a rabbinic mitzvah.
This is a break in it.
Oh, so why don't we say the Hallel now? We're obligated to recite the Hallel on the Seder night, so why are we making a bracha before we begin the Hallel at the night of the Seder? We don't. Yeah?
I also was wondering, when it's half Hallel, you're supposed to say the bracha.
Good question. And the prevailing custom is that only the Chazan says it, and everybody else says Amen. Others have a different custom to say it in undertone with the Chazan, and others just say it all the time. Read the English. There's a few paragraph English instruction manual in our Siddur, in our blue Siddur. Have a read there, you'll see.
And also the final bracha for Hallel too.
Final bracha is always said. Yalucha.
No, the final line.
Right. Melech mulo b'tishbachos. Yeah, that too. But that's going to come up in our Gemara soon. Okay, yes, but good point. Okay, so at this Hallel that we say at the Seder night, we don't make a bracha. Two reasons gives the Rebbe. One comes from Reb Tzemach Gaon, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. Peresh, he explained, Lefishim Mafsikim by Besuda, because this Hallel is broken up into two, and we take a break by eating a meal in the middle. Usually, when we recite the Hallel, right, we say it in total, in one standing. One sitting, I was going to say, but one standing, and we'll see in a second why I'm making that little joke.
In the Haggadah, it's the full Hallel, not the half Hallel.
It is the full Hallel, but it's broken up. We say only the first two paragraphs right now at this point before cup number 2, and then the rest after benching. So because there's a meal in between, therefore we don't make a bracha.
You learned this in Kiddush too.
We spoke about this, making a break in a bracha, yes. Now here's an interesting thing. This is something I thought about before. I'm just going to drop it a little bit here. I'm not going to get into my thoughts on the matter, but just to drop it here. Earlier in the Rebbe's Haggadah, we spoke about this once a couple of years ago, maybe you might remember. We learn about the mitzvah, the rabbinic mitzvah, to check our home, to search our home for chametz. When you search your home for chametz, the night before, right, you make a bracha before you do that mitzvah. What's the bracha you make? Blessed are you, God, our Lord, who commanded us, who has sanctified us with the commandments and has commanded us to, what would you say we say? To do what?
Sanctify.
No.
The commandment.
1 second. When you put on tefillin, what do you say? Okay, good. So when you check for chametz, what do you say?
Oh, sorry. B'dikas chametz.
Oh, you would think that you would say, blessed are you, God, our Lord, who has commanded us with the mitzvah of checking for chametz. We don't. We say, blessed are you, God, our Lord, who has commanded us with the mitzvah to get rid of chametz. Now,
in order to get rid of it.
But and 1 second. Now, so in order to get rid of it, we have to check to make sure it's not there anymore. right? It's not about looking for chametz so much as it is about making sure the chametz is gone. Okay, and really the fulfillment of the mitzvah is at the end of the search, we make a declaration declaring all of our chametz ownerless, right? And in that declaration, we rid ourselves of chametz, and that's really the mitzvah. This Rebbe explains at the beginning of the Haggadah. Are you following that? Okay, now
The external.
now, oh yes, exactly. The external will is to search, but the internal will is to get rid. Good. Which comes in that declaration at the end when we say we're no longer chametz ownerless. And the next day, when we burn the chametz, we again make a declaration declaring all of our chametz ownerless. We don't make a bracha then. Now, the reason is because it's an extension of the mitzvah we began the night before. Yeah?
Right, because you say the bracha at night, but then in the
daytime, when you actually burn the chametz and you make a declaration again to render all your chametz ownerless, and in some ways, that declaration is even more thorough than the declaration the night before. Because the night before, you declare all the chametz you haven't seen ownerless. But the chametz you have seen, you don't declare that ownerless because you're still going to be eating breakfast the next morning, which is chametz. But then the next day, when you burn the chametz, you make a declaration to declare all chametz ownerless, even the stuff you've seen. So it's one mitzvah divided into two. What's so it's one mitzvah divided into two, and we still make a bracha at the beginning of the first. So why here, when we divide the halal into two, do we not make a bracha? Do we not make a bracha if, when it comes to checking the chametz, it's divided into two? The night before, when you check and you make a declaration, and the next day when you burn and make the declaration again, we're telling you you could make a bracha. You make a bracha before you check, and you make the bracha to get rid of the chametz because that's the beginning of your mitzvah. So why difference? When it comes to halal, we're dividing it into two. We don't make a bracha because hey, it's divided. We're checking the chametz and ridding the chametz is also divided. We start the night before and we conclude the next day.
The first part.
Good way. Follow the question?
Is a complete.
They didn't follow the question? The Rebbe said here, why don't we make a bracha on halal on the night of the Seder? Why? No, what's the answer? He quoted Tzemach Goyen saying, because it's divided.
Right.
We're not doing it in one sitting. We're splitting it up, and we have a meal in the middle to break it up. Yeah? Mm-hmm. When it comes to this getting rid of the chametz, we also divide it into two. Night before checking, next day burning. And we still make a bracha before we check. And the bracha we make is not to check, but to get rid. But that mitzvah to get rid doesn't conclude till the next day. And yet we make a bracha.
So you could eat.
You following?
Yeah, but I'm saying you could.
When it comes to the halal, though, because it's split, no new bracha, no bracha because it's split in half. So do we make a bracha when mitzvah split? We don't make a bracha when mitzvah split.
Yeah.
Follow?
I would think, yeah.
What about even speaking? Like let's say after you make the bracha for the burning of the chametz, you should only really speak until you burn it.
Oh, now you're pushing towards my answer. Yes, because the halacha is you cannot speak until you make. Oh, yes. You're getting towards my answer. You're getting towards my answer. Yeah, you're getting towards my answer. What does the Rebbe say here? You follow what you just said?
Yeah.
What were you going to say before we go forward?
I can see why the difference between the two outcomes.
Oh, so I think Meir was pointing towards something correct. What were you thinking?
That perhaps the first, the night of the search is not. It is complete.
Oh, it is complete. The night of the Seder is complete, even though there's part two coming tomorrow. Even though part two is coming tomorrow, the act of searching is complete. No, not just searching. They're ridding yourself of the chametz. Because again, the bracha you make is not, thank you Hashem for the mitzvah to search for the chametz. It's thank you Hashem for the mitzvah to rid yourself of the chametz. And that mitzvah is fulfilled at the end of the search when I make a declaration rendering all the chametz ownerless. That action is a complete and total action. Even though part two is coming tomorrow, that action is standalone, complete action. How do I know? Your point. Because from when I make that bracha until I make that declaration at the end of the search, I'm not allowed to talk. Unless I'm talking about the search and I'm talking about the ridding myself of the chametz. Just like I can talk about kiddush before I make kiddush, or I can talk about eating challah from washing till I eat challah, but that is a single total unit.
So if you couldn't be silent during that thing for whatever reason, then you shouldn't say a bracha again in the beginning of that?
If the Torah required you to speak, in the middle. So what does the Rebbe say here? Look at the words that are Tzemach Goyen. Peidish, the second line there. If Tzemach Goyen Zatzal Peidish, why don't we make one bracha? Why don't we make a bracha? The we stop with a meal. We make an interruption with a meal. Why is it add with a meal? Why not just say the fishim mafsikim? Because it's broken. Why add it's broken with a meal? Because the meal you're eating here is, first, it's not just Shulchan Aruch. You're breaking with a meal of matzah, which is a full meal, halachic meal. You're breaking with the meal of maror, which is a halachic full meal. You're breaking with the meal of kardak, which is a halachic full meal. And you're breaking with the meal, the actual meal, which is also a halachic full meal. So the halach itself is requiring you to do a different action before you finish the first one. When it comes to checking, and you conclude with a declaration to render the chametz ownerless, says halacha, don't do anything else until you've completed this activity. Make a bracha. Even though part 2 is coming tomorrow, and you can't make a bracha on part 2 because you already made a bracha on part 1, that would be more like you make a bracha hagafen, you drink a cup of wine. From when you make hagafen until you drink the cup of wine, you can't interrupt.
Right.
But once you drink the cup of wine, can you interrupt? Absolutely. Do I make a new bracha on the next cup of wine that comes to me? No. I had made an interruption, but the first action was a complete action which gets a bracha. And then the next is a continuation of that. So the first action the night before was a complete action which concluded with an actual declaration to render chametz ownerless. And if a bracha can go on that activity, and there's a halachic obligation to do nothing else but that activity, part 2 is coming tomorrow. When it comes to halal, the halacha itself says, before you finish that activity of halal, stop and eat 3 meals. Meal of matzah, meal of maror, meal of karach, and another meal, 4 meals actually. And therefore it's actually broken up by the halacha. You never do a complete action at once. Follow that?
So I guess for clarification,
Spread.
Yeah.
for clarification, so
Yes.
it's not a machlekes then?
No, it's not. Of course, it's not machlekes.
No,
It's one night. We say the one.
Because to me in my head it's still machlekes in the sense where it's like that the.
Not doing much.
And I mean, that we're saying that the act is completed, the chura, after you've collected and said.
The declaration declaring chametz ownerless. Yes, correct. Even though part 2 is correct, even though you can do it again, that's right. You can do that. You can go to sleep. You can eat,
Right.
but the halacha doesn't require you to do any of that.
Right.
In fact, the halacha says hold off on all that until you've done this action.
Right.
But when it comes to the halacha says, hey, in the middle of your halal action, stop and do something else. So you can't make a bracha on it. But actually, maybe it is a machlekes. Because let's see the next words of the Rebbe. So 1, you follow that, Yeshua?
Yeah.
Huh? You follow that, Chiddush there?
You can't complete an action all at once. It's complete.
The halacha itself does not allow you to complete the action of halal.
No, I get it. Now I understand.
When it comes to the checking of the chametz, even though part 2 is coming tomorrow, but that night checking is a self-sustained full mitzvah. You check and you make it.